making in Minecraft. I mean, we can talk about some other stuff. We'll try to make sure this is as interactive as possible and answer any questions you guys have. And what I thought would be fun is to start off with everybody kind of, if you want to do it in chat, it would probably be easiest, but like, maybe everybody could start with putting in their favorite game, like your favorite game that, you like to play still, or maybe something that had just a special memory for you, something that, just, I know it's hard sometimes to narrow it down, but yeah, if you want to throw something like that in the chat. And I know it's a horribly awful question, because how can you have just one? Oh, King's Quest, hell yeah. I didn't have a lot of PC games because I didn't have a good PC when I was a kid, but I used to play some of the old those like quest games, like Hero Quest and Police Quest. I used to find those so fascinating because they were so different than the games I grew up with. But yeah, let's see what people are liking. Chips Challenge. Nadine, what's Chips Challenge?
It was this random game that was on our PC. And I haven't been able to find it like ever since. I did find a video like a few months ago of Chips Challenge, but it's a game that I got addicted to and then it randomly got deleted off my PC. And as a kid, that's like devastating when you reach one of the highest levels and you can never find the game again.
Yeah, I know that feeling for sure. I used to love. I wouldn't say it's my favorite game, but I used to love Pipes. It was like part of like Windows 3.1 or something. It was like a little flow game. Like it had, you like kind of made the water flow. It was like, I think, green actually, but it was like you had to rotate these tiles to make yeah. Um, that was a pretty fun game. I would say there's a I know the question's a hard one. Um, because it's really hard for me to pick what's my favorite. Oh yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading everybody's things. For when I first got in the game industry, I worked at this company in California called Way Forward, and I worked there for almost 10 years, and we did a lot of handheld stuff. So the first game I worked on, it's kind of become a cult classic. It's called Shantae, and it's if you have an old copy of the Game Boy Color version, hold on to it, because it's like goes for a couple $1,000 now. So, uh, but that game, I mean, working there, one of the things we did was we took and we had listed we had a top 10 list of our favorite games, and that's a little bit easier than just picking one, right? And so we have a top 10 list, and we put them on our the door of our office. All that we had a little design room, and all the designers sat together, and we put that on there, and it was cool because it was kind of like you could see where they were coming from their designs, from like what their kind of their favorite games were. And for me, a lot of my games are tied to like I guess more of a feeling or an emotion. Um, and there's some like Tetris is always high on my list. It's like one of the most perfect games ever made, probably, because it's just so, I mean, it's everything about flow state that you can imagine, right? It's just a kind of a perfect game for simplicity. Um, but and so that was, I mean, I think everybody had that on their list, but a lot of mine were like more like I had Pac-Man, which, I mean, it's such a common game, but it was a game that I had so many fond memories of as a child. And Dragon's Lair, which is another game that no one else had on their list, but it was such like important game to me, that just like sucked me into the world of games and storytelling, and what, just it was so innovative and so different than anything else. And so, I mean, those are a couple of mine. I think if I had to, you know, gosh, it'd be really hard to pick, but I think that Dragon's Lair, I would usually say, is one of my favorites. And it's funny because as a game, it's pretty repetitive, but its presentation is just out of this world. It's hand-drawn cartoon by a ex-Disney animator, Don Bluth, um, who like did like Secret of Nim later. He did All Dogs Go to Heaven. He's done uh, several films, but he made Dragon's Lair. He was the produced the cartoon. It was basically a Laserdisc game. Yeah, it was hard. See, my background is my dad fixed arcade video games, and which I might have mentioned this in some of our other calls, but I got to play the coin-op games for free, and so I know I saw that in Stranger Things. I was stoked because it was they almost showcased it, like they made a big deal about it, and I was like super jazzed because it was such an important part of my life, that game, and it just got me. If there was, as much as I enjoyed other games, I'd say that was one of the first games where I wanted to make games. I wanted to be a filmmaker. My whole life, and do special effects, and all. I've kind of moved around, and so that game was really important because it had a lot of those elements to it. But cool. So now, mostly, I guess this is going to be staring at a document, which I'm going to give you guys later. But one of the things that would be cool is if, I mean, if you want to try to do some of these techniques, I don't want to say homework, but I know that's a word a lot of you probably relate to. But maybe we could like do this over maybe this won't be finished today because I think it'll be hard to get through all of it. So maybe we'll do a part two. But I would love to see stuff that you've done or that you think is a good example, or even stuff that we create during this call that utilizes some of these techniques, because a lot of these techniques that we're going to show today are just things that I've evolved from for Minecraft education. Things So a lot of them are game design techniques that I've used throughout my career, but um, more importantly, I think that they work really well for um, what you guys are doing with Minecraft in the classroom, because a lot of them are talking about you know techniques like corralling and techniques like time management. So I'm going to pull up this doc. I'm going to share it. It's just a Word doc, so it's nothing fancy. It's actually, this is pulled out of the Education Edition back when it was called the Education Edition. So you're going to probably see some MEE uh, branding that I need to pull out. But let me just share my screen here. Oh, can I do this? Ooh, okay. So, let me know when you can see it. Can you see this?
We
Okay,
can
cool.
see it.
Okay, cool. So there's some I tried to put some photos in. This is like I said, this is pulled out of of another doc that I had, this design Bible. And the design Bible had a lot of stuff. It basically had everything from Minecraft education, um, every feature that separates it, um, every feature that separates it from Minecraft. It basically detailed everything else that you could do separately. So um, I pulled a lot of that stuff out. I'm sure you know it makes it different. So first off, uh, I'm sure you're aware of the basic kind of uh, design principles of Minecraft, um, and we talk about it just being a tool for exploration, adventure. It's a game that encourages creativity, ingenuity. Um, it kind of has elements that kids find exciting. There's something that I always call spooky safe, which is when a game has like elements that of like danger or spookiness, like the things that as a kid you really kind of latch on to, like the unknown. And Minecraft has a lot of that built into it. Exploring caves, for example, is just something that um, it kind of just drives your imagination. You never know what's around the next turn. So Minecraft has a lot of that just built into it. Um, so with the education design, um, there's going to be different things going on. These little techniques that I use um, to kind of, I don't know, make the lessons work a little bit better. You're not trying to create, you know, a, you're not trying to create Minecraft itself. You're trying to create something smaller within it, right? Um, so one of the first things that I look at in this, and these are probably applicable to all kinds of other areas, but when like scope is the first thing um, that I look at when coming up with like this is basically for content, right? So this stuff you're going to be making for yourself or for your classes. So for managing scope, um, scope is basically how big is your project, and it's good to, even on the it doesn't matter how large your project is. I personally find it helpful to kind of start with some sort of pitch or treatment. I like to keep stuff on paper because it'll kind of keep you true, and it makes it hard to, well, it makes it harder to lose your way and avoid things like feature creep, which is really easy to have happen. And once you start getting into that realm and you get away from your original idea, it's kind of, it can be really hard to get it back on track. So we have these practices of define, evaluate, and control. Excuse me, and most of these are all, like I said, all related to um, the initial planning and just trying to manage your design and not let it get out of control, um, get too big for you. Um, Again, like I think scope is something that is talked about in not beyond game design. It's something that we can think about in all aspects of life, but really important in game design when it you know all your time is money sort of a lens. So um, the now with scope kind of out of the way, I think, because I mean that's pretty. I mean, I don't think anybody would have a question about scope, but scale, when scale is not scope. When I talk about scale, and I'm talking about the actual building size in Minecraft. And so this is one of the first things um, that I like to tell people is to really pay attention to scale, because the scale in Minecraft is also time. And typically what you have in Minecraft is you have to really, for your classrooms. And Minecraft itself, I mean, everybody knows it just goes forever, and you can play forever. And I mean, I don't know if like when you start a new survival world for the first time, if you're like me, I'll spend like 3 or 4 hours without even knowing where that time went, and I've like accomplished so little because it's just a game where you're just like, oh man, I just spent 20 minutes like collecting cobblestone. I don't know why, but um, you want to avoid those kind of traps for your players most likely. So when it comes to scale, we know how a block typically is a meter, right, in Minecraft, and it takes time. It takes like to cover like 250 blocks. It takes about a minute a time. So if you have a 20-minute session, you could kind of start to think about the math of how far you want people to walk, and we'll get into how that all plays together in a minute. But I broke it kind of down to like 3 scales, and by no means is that all the scales there are, but as a generalization, immersion scale is when you kind of play to Minecraft's scale. It's where a door and a player is kind of like, that's the real world scale. A bed, I always look at 2 objects. I look at a bed and I look at a door. And if I build everything to match that scale, that's what I call immersion scale. It can be slightly bigger or smaller, but like this little house is probably smaller than you typically want, but it still works to the scale. The door is too high; it fits the player. A player's 2 blocks high, roughly, a little shorter, but right in there. And then something like this is an example from DuckTales, which is one of the DLCs I worked on a couple of years ago. And in DuckTales, it was also immersion scale, so everything was set up so that everything felt like your size. So here's an example of what I call detail scale, and that's when you build stuff larger. I don't quite remember who made the Rangers map, but it has these incredibly detailed animals, and but to get that scale, that fidelity, they basically changed what a block is in their world. And so you know like as far as scale, like in this picture, it looks like you might be looking at this giant rhino, but you can look at the trees and tell, you can see how big a block is and how small you would be. So it's great for showing off detail. It's great for making immense builds, giant like landscapes. But um, these builds are, like, for example, in that Rangers one, I believe you ride around on a mine cart. So they've done things to escalate your speed through the map, because if you had to walk through this, you wouldn't, all you would see is like this rhino for the whole 20 minutes of your gameplay. And finally, this is one that we've used for creation, but you're probably not going to use for gameplay. But it's a miniature scale. We actually built DuckTales map using um, this small. We called it a space allocation model, and we would we'd plot it out in blocks so that we could have kind of a good idea of what the layout's going to be, but in a way that you can kind of see the arm over here, just in a way that we could take it in, because you don't have to fly around as much, you don't have to zoom, the fogging doesn't affect. So this is how we kind of laid out the major geographical beats for our map, and then we scaled that up in like MC Edit or something, and that gave us like our one-to-one kind of like space allocation where things are going to be. And it's not really something that you would use to you probably would just build it small and then blow it up and put people in it, but it helped us have the layout all laid out, and then we would just knock those things down and put in the real buildings. Like, you could tell that this is kind of like a city in front, right, and the mountains and all that just got scaled up and then got detailed. So it's kind of a cool way to lay out your world. Of course, I always start on paper for a lot of this. Before this map was even uh, built in miniature scale, it was drawn out on paper. And I for time saving, I recommend you do everything kind of on paper up front. That's part of the scope, and keeping true to it. If you aren't familiar with just kind of basic like game design, like you usually start with you start with like a pitch doc or an outline or something to get people hyped. But as you continue on, you create a GDD, they call it. It's a game design document, kind of a obvious acronym. But that document is really important when you have a lot of people working on something. If it's just you, it's just you can kind of keep it more simplified, and it's more like notes. But when you're working on a big team, obviously everybody's working on different parts, and so you need to have your vision spelled out pretty explicitly if people are going to be using it to make it. And it's funny because you spend so much time on a GDD and everybody's like, where's the GDD, we need the GDD. And then when you finish it, you feel like no one reads it. And when you're making a game, you get people are like, well, what's this supposed to do? You're like, it's in the GDD. And so it's just one of those ironies. um, so here's some things to think about with scale. Um, you kind of determine your scale as part of your scope, which is how big it's going to be, and this is where you can like create your maps on paper. You kind of know everything ahead of time, and know your time restraints. This is an important part, and this is something that I learned over time with EDU is how long your play sessions are. When you make a game for, I mean, especially back in the day before DLC, you wanted to get like, make a 20 to 30 hour game. Well, that's way more than you're probably going to be making. So I've always figured that if you take the bookends of setting up your time, people usually have about an hour, so you get like maybe 10 minutes on each bookend. So give them maybe 40 minutes, and you could play with that time. That's kind of my hour of code ratio, is to give them like maybe 40 minutes of gameplay. But even still, we kind of turn that back to around 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay, to make sure you have time for the bookends of briefings and getting them in and out of the game. So think about that and how that relates to scale. It's not there's some, well, we'll talk about it next, but bigger worlds, obviously, they need more size. Also, not just for space for distributing them, but also for like, you need a better computer. Some of the bigger worlds, yeah, if you're on a Chromebook and the draw distance is like 8 blocks or whatever it is, it's something really low. Having a big world can create its own problems with like navigation and getting people to get to the next spot where they need to go. And if you make your world too big, um, I guess mostly what I'm saying here is really be careful about the scale of what you're doing, um, which is tied to this little phrase I called build big, play small. And in that concept, it's like basically it's acknowledging that like the big builds are attractive, and people like to see like really cool sets and stuff you built. But if you have to play them, like if you make a Lord of the Rings simulator where you spend 2 or 3 hours walking, then you probably messed up. Walking isn't gameplay in itself. So if you make something big, you can still keep the gameplay localized and small, and like let them take in the majesty of your build, um, without making them have to climb to the Mount Doom or whatever. So something to think about there. It's I think one of the more common problems I see in people's content is the scale, the size, where they've built things a little too big. It takes a little too long to get around. And if you are going to make it big, the getting around thing is talking about, think of ways to make people get around faster. Use teleports, use mounts. Players love using mounts. You can make cars now. You have horses, mine carts, anything like that. If you're going to make them go great distance, have them do it in any way other than walking. Because like I said, I think it takes a minute to travel 250 blocks. All right, so yeah, that was scale. I guess I'll just kind of break it, all these little parts, and ask if anybody has a question or anything. And let me see if I could see questions. Oop, sorry. Maybe. Is there any questions? You can just talk if you have any. Nope. All right. Moving on is difficulty. Um, difficulty is you know it's Minecraft kind of has its own built-in difficulty. There's difficulty in like your game settings. There's difficulty as in, it's just a hard game. But a lot of times people make stuff that's actually difficult for the players to in Minecraft, and they're challenging the wrong ability. They're challenging like their parkour, um, when they should be, challenging kind of their knowledge, their intellect. So that's what I talk about with difficulty. And difficulty is a hard thing, to get like balanced difficulty. It's an important part of flow. Um, but it can be really hard to achieve a good ramp, a good balance of difficulty. I mean, scaling difficulty is I find it like one of the hardest things to do, and it depends on the game. An easy analogy would be like with like math is like 2 plus 2 is easy difficulty, and some long division would be a harder difficulty. Um, Minecraft's difficulty is kind of flat in itself. There's some some different goals that you can try to achieve, but the difficulty once set, as far as their damage and stuff, it's it, it's not a consistent. The goals are what makes the difficulty, uh, the flow part of the balance work, because um, the more you learn about playing the game, the more you're going to try new things, and so then your difficulty curve is going to go up on its own. But it's not like, oh, all these guys have 50 hit points now as opposed to 2 when I met them. It doesn't have a like a damage curve or a difficulty, or the enemies don't get more aggressive or anything. So as far as navigation goes, I talked about it a little bit already, but walking isn't gameplay. Um, Scott Rogers, who was he wrote a book on game design, which if you're interested in game design, I think it's one of the best game design books, because it's just so fun to read, because he does everything in a comic book style. I worked with him years ago when he was a creative director at THQ Games, and I worked on a couple games with him. And that was something I made. I made a really bad game once. Um, we all do, and um, he said walking isn't gameplay, and he's quite right. And so if you can make the journey, anything you can do to make the journey a little more fun, and for me, I try not to make it parkour and make it super difficult, but obviously elevation changes, giving them little places where they have to jump, or cross a log over water. I mean, anything that helps with that will make that more entertaining than just walking. And when it comes to like your giant build, unless it's like really giving them information, they might think it's cool looking and pretty, but like it's not gameplay, so no one like stops to like to like just take in all the scenery too much. So um I remember George Lucas used to say this. I think he ended up breaking his rule later in life, but in the old days, he used to talk about how the setting isn't really it's not the character. You don't have to stop and talk to it. You don't have to you know it's just you're just there. So he never spent a lot of time. He put a lot of detail into the world, and you just believed it. But um, it was he didn't stop to make you like look at everything. I mean, I think later on, once he got CG, he kind of started to do that. But so I have these little do's and don'ts that I listed on here. So I mean, like I said, you get the stock, but this is just like, do create interesting navigation opportunities, and don't create a parkour gym, because as I'm sure most of you know, a lot of our players, we find this out with our code every year. Some people have never played, and so they have a really hard time just moving forward and jumping over a gap in some cases. So we go back to talking about build big and play small, which I already kind of talked about. So create a big, beautiful world to visually excite your players, but don't confuse scenery for content. So I guess I can stop there for a second. Any questions yet, or no? We're good? I'm trying to see here. Are we good? What's this? What's the book? The book. Oh, the book from Scott Rogers is called Level Up. It's a he's written, I think, 3 books, but there's a new edition of that book. I think he has a second edition, and it's called Level Up, something like remember if it was a guide to game design or game designer's guide, and it's fantastic. And the funny thing is he had he had written he had put together a little workbook that he drew by hand to help Fistel. When Fistel was starting out, they were a small company, and they had worked on this game that got them, into the biz, basically called Drawn to Life, and it had kind of it didn't have the greatest platforming because they were a small company. They had kind of new inexperienced designers working on it for the most part. And so, although the game was really innovative because you got to basically create all your, I don't know if you ever played Drawn to Life, but you get to create what your character looks like. It was a DS game, so you got to draw on the DS. So you drew what your character was. You drew a lot of the enemies. You even drew some of the weapons and the platforms for this platformer. Very innovative, but not the best level design. That was actually my first job up in Washington area. Was I worked at that company, and I got hired to work on Drawn to Life 2 because I had a lot of platforming, 2D platforming experience. And so when I got up here, they handed me this little packet, and it was by Scott Rogers. He had drawn this little packet about like the basics of platforming, and I looked at it. I was like kind of a little insulted. I'm like, yeah, I know all this stuff. But as I started looking at it, I'm like, oh, he did this so well. I'm like, where'd you get this? And they're like, oh, that was from the, and then, I'm like, oh, I know Scott, blah, blah. And it was just this kind of funny moment. But that packet was the birth of his book. After making that packet, he decided to write a book for everybody. And then that's where that book came out of. So it's kind of a cool story. He even acknowledges it in the beginning of the book, like in the special thanks, he thanks the old CEO of that company, so that he could because it led him to his book. And then he had a second book that was about just purely about like handheld and touch screen kind of things, and that one's called, I think, Swipe This. And he actually I have a quote in that book. It's not a very it's it's kind of a weird quote, but it's just it's nice that he accredited me in his book, in his second book. So it was just talking about handheld. It was about using mixing touch and controls, like on DS. A lot of games were doing that, where they had you going back and forth. And I just said, if you don't need to, don't do that. It's not very fun to play a game with stylus in your mouth. So um, pick a lane, kind of was my advice. Anyway, so the okay, now I'll move on to visual storytelling, because I think there was no question so far. So visual storytelling obviously is, communicating, with images, but it's more than that, because it's kind of like shorthand for uh for the way your world works to some degree, or at least it can be used that way. And so when I talk about visual storytelling, um, I talk about it um, in a sense of player management. I mean, because you could tell a story. I mean, you could have like if you make a destroyed city, something bad happened, or if there's a flood. I mean, you can tell a lot just from like the setting. But what I'm talking about is cues that help your player um, know that they don't need to go over there, or where they should go. Anytime you use like a colored block or something to draw someone's attention, or a beacon, that's a little bit of it's a shortcut to letting people know, oh, I have to follow a beacon. Um, and it's tied to this technique of wrangling. And I put some pictures in here, but wrangling is just, keeping the player kind of focused on the right track. Really important in the shorter, you know, directed kind of content pieces. If you're just doing some open world kind of creative sort of mode, which I'll talk about that in like the different types of lesson plans later. But um, keeping people like on track, or at least knowing where to go and where they can't go so they don't waste their time, kind of becomes important. And I call that wrangling. And the way that I do it are with the easiest way I think is pathing. So anytime that you can use some sort of paths, like, in this, here's like 3 examples, and this one was um, just the grass path, right? You know that if you stay on the path and you walk, it's going to take you somewhere like that where you need to go. Breadcrumbing, if you are from, you could use anything for breadcrumbs, but a lot of times we use particles. You see it in a lot of games. A lot of times you'll collect them and they'll go away. And then you can do stuff with coordinates too, if you really want to be punishing. But I mean, you could turn it into a lesson. But if you have your XYZ, and you could like give them waypoints essentially. Those are like 3 examples. But even having stuff like unique landmarks inside your world, so that a player kind of knows if he's facing east or west, um, stuff like that will like kind of really help with their navigation. Um,
Cool. We have a hand up. I
oh,
don't know if it's Teresa or Teresa.
Just Teresa. Thank you.
Teresa.
Or Teresa. Yeah, I love what you're saying about the storytelling. And I was just wondering, how there's like that framework for stories, like it's someone, they've got a challenge, they got to figure
yeah,
out things.
the hero's journey. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And there's that one like story worthy where you start with the end, like
Hmm.
you know that someone's going to be transformed, like that Raiders of the
Yeah.
Lost Ark. He doesn't believe in God in the end. He does. Close your eyes,
Yep.
Marion. There's
Yep.
that really simple one. Are you, when you're creating the games, imagining the story for them, imagining multiple outcomes, or is it more like you're trying to create a story within a story so they can invent their story? And I didn't even know how to ask.
Um, it's a good question, and it's really kind of specific to what I'm doing. Typically, um, when the stuff that I make is usually pretty narrative driven. And so I am providing all that. I don't do as many open ended things. It's funny that you talk about the hero's journey. I had like this is basically the hero's journey. Can you see? Did that pop up on the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this right here, the reason I have this hero's journey little graph is actually because I was thinking about making a world where the player gets to learn about the hero's journey by making a template so that the player can go around and hit all these beats, and by the end they'll be creating their own story, but I'll make a world that supports that. So even though I say typically when I'm designing something that I would kind of come up with that narrative, I'm actually trying to work on this map that um,
Wow.
that lets the player come up with their own story, and I'm just making a template for them. So they would come across the NPC, and it would say, who's your hero, and then they would fill it in. So
Can
that
I
was a great question for.
can I copy? Can I screenshot that? This is amazing.
Oh yeah, I could drop this PNG into the chat. Let me.
Wow, that's amazing. And did
Um,
you make that? Cool.
no, the hero's journey. So it's funny. I mean, it's like a, it's it's quite. It's I guess I don't know. It's a device that like obviously has been around for a long time. There's the first time I used it with like knowing that it was this device was on an hour of code, but like one of the old ones before. It was called the hero's journey, and I was that's when I kind of like learned that I'm like that actually that storytelling device had a name, and that's when I first learned about it. Apparently, a family just be cautious using the name in your works, because the family still owns the copyrights to that name. And so as silly as that sounds, you know how litigious our society is. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's just a cautionary tale. But yeah, so this is a good. I mean, you could think of so many movies. I mean, you mentioned Indiana Jones. I mean, this is like the story of Star Wars too, right? This is like Luke Skywalker's journey. This is so many stories, so many common. The the hero who finds the new world, and has to rise to the occasion. And it's it's a great it's a great device to follow these beats, because it's just really good. So
Well,
yeah, I
you know
hope
how
to
you
make. Yes, go on.
mhm. Well, you know how you brought up, sorry, you brought up Star Wars
Hmm.
and that story framework. It's like the hero meets a guide,
Hmm.
and like we're always wanting to be the guide. So
Hmm.
is that something that could be kind of built into the design? It's like, okay, so you have your student, they're going to be the hero, and somehow there's a guide in there. Or do
Yeah,
they
so
want to be?
that's like when they're still in their normal world. Like, for Luke, he was still on Tatooine. He met Obi-Wan, right? And Obi-Wan was his mentor, and then that brought him across the threshold into this new world of the rebellion. And so, and he had his trial. He's like, I want to be a Jedi like my father. And he's like, here's your lightsaber. And he tried to train him, and the little round targeting droid just kicked his ass, right? Like, he couldn't even fight a little droid. And at the end, he finally harnesses the power of the Force, is able to take out the biggest round sphere they've ever seen, the Death Star. So you can literally line up beats to this chart to Star Wars, and to so many other movies. And then, once I mean, you can also look at it as the whole, right? Of the Star Wars, the trilogy, at least. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you could break all of them down into this, but it just kind of repeated, I think. But you can look at this for Star Wars, but you can also look at this as the whole trilogy, and you could line up like every movie into this too. And I think you could do it for everything. I mean, you talked about Indiana Jones; it has the same thing. That one kind of took him back, where Indy's natural environment was half being a professor, which they kind of showed at the beginning. But at the very beginning, it starts off, kicks you off right into the action, where Indy's in the jungles, and he's you know you, he barely call him an archaeologist at that point. He was more like a Tomb Raider, basically. And uh and then he goes through, and like you said, he doesn't really, I don't know if I'd say he gets a mentor, but he gets he answers a calling, right? His government is calling upon him to save the world, from the Nazis. If Hitler gets the Ark, he can take over the world. And he has to answer that. And like you said, his faith, he although he, I believe, grew up religious, he wasn't. He kind of dismissed all that. He kind of talked about how he doesn't really believe it anymore. In the whole trilogy, again, going back, it gets broader, because and you learn more about his backstory with religion in the Last Crusade, and how his father was obsessed with the Grail and all that. But um, yeah, it's a cool little device. I put it in the chat, and it's a nice way to think about, like, making a quest in a storyline, because it's a really rewarding story, right? It's timeless. I mean, to some degree. So, yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good one, and it gave me a chance to gauge interest in that template world. It sounds like it sounds like something that at least you would like, but hopefully everybody would think would be helpful. I will continue to work on that. Yes, this document that I'm talking to right now. Who? I'm sorry, I don't. Oh, is that you, Dan? Did you post that?
That's me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I could drop this in too. Let me.
Awesome.
I'll do it. And I mean, I don't know what I have on my desktop, and so I'm afraid to minimize. And I don't want you guys to see all my bad stuff. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
Of course,
So,
but
Cole,
I definitely will. Yes.
Nicole, there's another question. I'm
Yes.
hoping I'm saying your name right. Alina. Sorry if I'm messing up your name, but she wrote, I'm creating educational world for 10-year-olds, and I have some simple separate tasks in my mind where they will teleport from one task to another if they answer correct answers using NPC. Any suggestions to create visually appealing scenery for small tasks and blocks of grass template? like walls, corridors, not just plain scenery with NPCs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And making small little starting small is great, and that's the cool thing about Minecraft. I think is the scale is really in your hands as opposed to some of, like, if you ever used Unreal or something. Um, I think that editor's it's a little harder to control scale. I mean, it is still possible, but it's I think Minecraft. I know Minecraft's a game, but when we look at it as creators, we have to kind of look at it Minecraft as an engine. Um, One thing that I would consider doing is doing like almost like plays, like backdrops, like facades, if you will. And so you can make like little sets. A lot of times, you could, because you think about like think about a movie set and how they'll make everything look, like you're like out in outer space, or you're out in a mountain range. It's just like a matte painting or something. But the set could be relatively small. You can do that in Minecraft really easily. So if you want to teleport them to a new place, one thing you could do is just make like a little set. You could have it be open air, or you could just put it in a box. One of the easiest things to do is make like any number. I say is kind of just arbitrary. It depends on you and what size you want to do. But imagine just doing a fill box, doing a fill command. If you're familiar with the commands, you can just fill and make a box. Like fill with the XYZ that, like, say, well, I'll just say 10, which might be too small for you, but make a 10 by 10 box and pick hollow, and it will basically create a box with the insides out, and that could be your set. Think of it as your little movie set. Now you could decorate that set, and um, and then have your teleporter, so you can jump around from each one of those little sets that you make, and um, you'd be surprised how effective that is. We do that. I mean, most of our games we do that. We don't, have a lot of, like, we don't have a contiguous world because, like I said, it's just kind of wasted in the 20 minutes. If you're doing, like, especially if you're doing a narrative driven thing, um, we use a lot of teleports, and that's just one way. Is that helpful, or is there something? I mean, if you just want to decorate, because you talked about appealing scenery for blocks of grass, a real easy thing you could do just to Minecraft up blocks of grass is to equip bone meal and walk around and start hitting the ground, and you'll start doing there is just creating a forest instantly. You're like, you'll start making flowers everywhere. You could throw down some saplings, start like hitting them with bone meal and making a forest really quick. It's I often do that, like when we talk about the visual storytelling and corralling, and as part of wrangling. One of the things that I do, I'm going to jump ahead just a second to show you because it just relates, but I create perimeters. And so, like, you can see this is blocks of grass, and I created like this perimeter of a forest. Now, forest, to some people, a forest is welcoming, and they're like, "Ooh, I want to go in that forest and see what's in there. I'm an adventurer. I want to explore." But to other people, they might be like, "Ooh, forest is kind of dark and uninviting. I don't want to go in there. I'm not going to go in there." But I use it as for my visual storytelling of saying this is kind of off limits. So if I put a hard perimeter, which a hard perimeter is something that's impossible to pass, and a soft perimeter is more of like a suggestion of don't pass. If you combine them, it ties together. It basically justifies your hard collision. If you remember playing old games from the 90s, for early 3D games, you'd be like running out to the edge of the world, and it looks like you're running into the horizon forever, and you're like, oh, I'm getting somewhere, and you turn around, you haven't gone an inch, and you're just like, oh, there's an invisible wall. How sad, how disappointing. This ties the mental. It basically, like I said, it justifies the fact that you can't go through there. So if you have a soft perimeter and a hard perimeter together, it's very satisfying. It meets player expectation because you're like, oh, there's a forest, and the bold will go, ooh, I'm going to go in that forest. Like, oh, I can't go in the forest, but I understand. They don't want me in the forest, as opposed to just a fence or a wall. But any kind of when you talk about wrangling and you talk about these perimeters, anything basically that stops them from moving forward is a hard perimeter, and anything, the soft ones can be anything that just kind of looks like you can't, like you shouldn't, and it's just for the boundaries of really keeping your players in line and for their mental health, because in a game like Minecraft where everything sprawls, um, it's you can get off track really quick. I remember one of the first things I ever worked on Minecraft. I probably shared this story before, but I lost my town. I lost the thing I was working on because I took off and went some other where, and I couldn't find what I did, and I thought I actually lost all my work because it was really early in the game. We didn't have a lot of the you know ways to get back to where you were, but I did find it eventually. But it was scary for a minute. Thought I lost a lot of work just by getting lost, which sounds silly, but um, was that was that helpful? Did that help or
I think that's good, Cole.
okay?
I think you can actually, I don't know how well you can see it. There's a practical example of a hard border in my screenshot behind me.
It's kind of small. Is it the one that's running along like
Yeah, you can see there's a
the wall?
huge, big, thick line of
Yeah,
trees
gotcha.
behind
Yeah,
the
mhm.
I've got houses and a street and some construction vehicles and a bus shelter, and then all along behind that is a hard border there.
Yep. Yeah, and did you make that a hard perimeter? Like, did you
Yeah,
like? Is it like you can't walk through it?
that's right.
Okay, but it also visually, just from standing where you are, I can get the impression that that's the end of the world. I'm like, okay, that's
Exactly.
yeah, and so I mean, it's a real helpful thing for your mind, right? And
Yeah.
that makes a big difference in
And that's kind of what
your
we do a lot
ease.
of in these worlds, right? Is like we create little island pockets and then we'll surround them with a hard border with trees or
Yeah.
mountains or things like that. You guys do that quite a lot.
Hmm. Yeah. Remember, 2 blocks high, without any assist is a perimeter. Like
Yeah.
if you make something and it could just be a ring of hill. Like a lot of times I'll have like a mountain range around something just to cap it off, or like a forest. As long as you have 2 blocks, forest is fun because if you're doing something in adventure where they can't break leaves are usually like just smashed through. But if you make it so they can't, the gap usually between the branch and the other one could be one gap, so they're stuck anyway. So yeah, it's a useful tool. I know that we didn't get as far as I had hoped into the doc. I will share it out, but it it was this helpful or valuable? Should we do a part 2 to this and go
Oh
deeper?
yeah,
Um,
definitely. This is great. Like, I mean, I have an informal sort of introduction to game design, but like this is really filling in so many little blanks or, providing me with like proper terminology. So things like
yeah,
that. This is so valuable. This is brilliant.
cool. Um, well, how about, I mean, you, like you said, you have examples there. Maybe if you guys want to like do some examples, and then next week we could pop in and look at them and just see how
Yeah.
they align. It'd be really cool to kind of go through this and see where you're already doing stuff, and then, or we can look at some of the stuff you guys are making and say, okay, like this is how you could incorporate it, and then we could look at like how to wrangle um the wrangling and stuff. This is like a common thing in games, right, to keep your players on track, but in education lessons it's super important because time is a premium in your classrooms, right, and for your players. And if you're making some long adventure or some long term, like something where you're coming back to it and you're a lot of times those types of builds, I think I talk about the different type of builds somewhere down here, but sorry, I'm like, oh yeah, like the different types of builds, um like expression builds or experience builds, depending on what you're doing. um that's that time is crucial to getting out of it what you want. So um I'll I'll send this. I'll put this in the chat, and you guys can grab this, and feel free to read through the end. It kind of just cuts off abruptly, but um, again, I kind of just clipped this out of my design Bible and tried to put it in a little format that was a little easier for me to share. But I think most of these principles, a lot of them apply to gaming in general, and I'm sure you'll recognize that. But a lot of these were things that I found from working actually on Minecraft lessons. So, or like critiquing. It was the pitfalls. Like when we first started doing content, educational content, I would look at people's maps when we first started, and although the education content was there, the playability wasn't there. And so if you get that playability in there, and you get them in the flow state, it's gonna be really successful, right? And you're gonna have them coming back for more and so hungry for what you got to give them. So that's what you want as a game designer. Consume my content.
Wow. Thank you so much, Cole. I think we're at time, but this
Yeah.
was really, really great.
It goes quick.
And I'm happy. I'm happy that we're doing a part 2 next month.
Yeah, and if that's okay with everybody, and I mean, if there's something else that you guys would rather talk about, just let Nadine know, put in the lounge or something. If there's more like how-tos or whatever you'd rather do, let me know. But if not, maybe we could just go back to here. But maybe if you guys are down for it, bring something and let's look at what we're doing and let's try to work on it together and compare it to the list and see where you're at, and hopefully where you want to be is where I want to get you. So and then it's last thing I guess is, was there any other last minute questions or anything? So
And just one follow-up question, Cole. So
sure.
what you're saying is if anyone is currently working on anything, for example, a world or content for their students or their classrooms or organizations, just to kind of bring that in as an example, and then we'll kind of not necessarily pick it apart, but look at it and compare it against the list.
Yeah. We could do it however, like you could bring your world with you next time. You could share, or you could send it to me and I can open it and I could walk through it and do live notes on it, however you want. But it's really, I mean, it's up to you if you want to do it, but it's just like if you want to kind of try some of these techniques, even if you're just making a small world that's just focusing on them, like make something that shows that does a bunch of corralling, or something that has just, I don't know, something that kind of utilizes those, like do the stopwatch test on your thing and figure out how long you want your lesson, and then see if you're accurate where you are, like see how long it takes to walk from point A to B of your map. So but yeah. Well, I'm trying to look in the chat. How about it? Yeah. There's a question about
The one by Mike.
Yeah, about item frames.
Yeah, how can I detect image on image on surface by using execute the blocks command?
Yeah, you do a test for blocks, and you compare it to
yes, but it's a complex question because the item frame have like 8 kind degrees, like 0, 45, 90, etc. So even if I check test for execute blocks, there is the way that I must check this twice because the player have 2 directions. Yeah. And I found that I can do it by scoreboards, but for every item frame, it's like 3 commands. So it's hard to to write. I now write like 60 commands for it, so
Yeah.
it's a little annoying. Is there any way how to solve that or do this less work?
Yeah. Well, here's something that I always say, which you're not gonna love, is like, "Welcome to Minecraft." No, it's yeah,
Yeah.
no. So like well, for starters, what you're trying to do, I imagine what you're trying to do, is like have a poster or something and have them match it, and when it's successful, you're giving them a yay, right? Um, it used to work. It used to work the way you want it to, and they changed it. If you guys ever played, do you remember the first hour of code in Minecraft, the 2019, the AI for good with the agent and he's like helping find fires? I made a companion map to that called Code Town. Do you guys remember Code Town? It had a bunch of coding challenges, and each time you got a piece of a map, and you could put it in the frame, and you could make a poster, right? It back when I made that, it actually worked. I think how you wanted, where it's like, oh, it's that piece, and it's the rotation was one of four, but then they changed it, and I didn't find out that they changed it until we did one of the Nobel Peace Center maps, and it was the one that had the Lolly Dama, and you had to build what do they call that thing? A Mandela? Is that what it's called? The sand thing, and you had to build that, and then we used that technique on the ground. And what we had to do, and this is probably not the answer you want, but unfortunately, it's all I have for you, is we had to do a test for, and we had to have that thing replicated twice. Once with a 3 rotation and once with a 6 rotation, so that either way it looked correct to the player was correct. I know that sucks. I know that's not what you want to hear, but
Yes, it's
it is
very sucks.
possible. But that's the only way right now. I've mentioned it, and I believe there's a bug, or at least it's known that if it looks right to the player, it should count as a 3 or a 6. So maybe it'll get fixed in the future, because like really what you want is to just make sure that piece is probably right, and maybe the rotation if you're doing because if you rotate, it's the problem is when you use a map, right? I'm guessing that's what you're using, because if you're using a like an arrow, the arrow has the true rotational, because the arrow can rotate to all your 8 positions, but an image only flops to the 4 cardinals. So yeah, a 3 is you know, like you click it 3 times, it's actually, you know, it's only showing 2 or whatever it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, this is the problem.
Yeah,
So,
I'm familiar.
So
so
I
Cole,
solved that by setting the scoreboards from
Yeah,
to
that's a good.
every map, and even the player check the third or sixth position, the scores is 1 or 0.
Yeah,
So
that's a creative way to do it. I did it just by duplicating the map twice, but yeah, I could see how that could work too. It's a good workaround. Unfortunately, it is something you have to work around right now, but um, it's good to get that feedback, because then it you know, when we have bugs and we have, you know, if something's not like, you know, ruining maps, it gets way less attention, and so it's good to know when people are struggling, because then I go, hey, I got, you know, one of our creators has an issue with this, and so it helps us get it fixed.
okay, thank y'all so much. Cole, I just wanted to do one follow-up because I know we said
Sure.
something about sending worlds via emails, and I know that's an important question to address before we get off the call. So, do you want them to send it via email, like during the next call? I know if they send it now, it will probably get lost. I know we get so many emails every
Uh,
day.
if you want to send it to me, to my email, I'll put all the worlds. Just put your name on it, on the world name, the world file, your name. Yep, and there's my email. I'll throw them all in a folder, and I'll have it for next time. So
Okay.
you don't have to worry about like trying to take submissions all week. Just send them to me, and I'm sure I get way less email than you do actually needing. So send it to me, and um, I'll check my spam in case it gets filtered out, but it probably won't if you send it to that address. But yeah, and then we can look at them next time, and I'll continue to that list. I will put this here now. I could minimize my screen. I will put. I'm looking for there it is. Cool. Here is the design doc. Did it come through?
I don't see it yet.
Okay. It's thinking. I think it's red. Can you not send? Oh, why? Why? Failed to send. I don't understand what Teams likes and doesn't like. It was fine with that picture, but it doesn't like this doc. If you're, well, is there any way? What can we do? I'm trying again. Maybe let me just see.
If you send it, okay.
Did it work? No, it didn't work. Okay, someone said a PDF. I will try that. I'll try to convert it. Yeah, it's probably because who knows? People can run macros through Word, right? Isn't that the deal? Maybe they're afraid. I can. I think my OneDrive. I don't know if I can have people access my OneDrive, my work one. I don't know. I don't. Maybe I can. I don't know.
Oh yeah. SJ said to share it in the teacher's lounge. I can do that if you give it to me.
Okay.
I can probably. Yeah.
Yep. Well, we'll make sure you guys get it for sure today. So, I'll try to do the. Let me try real fast right now to see if I could. Let's just see if this works. Desktop, save. Let's just see if this works. I'm trying the PDF thing because maybe that will work. Maybe it just doesn't like a raw Word doc. So crazy what it likes and doesn't. Okay, let me just see if this works. Oh. It's not red yet. No, it's red. Dang it. Okay, sorry guys. We'll get it to you. Wow, how weird. How could that be worse than a JPEG? What if I just put the worst PNG up that you've ever seen? How? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming, and I hope you got something out of it. Like I said, I didn't get as far as I wanted to, but I do want to make this, as always, as interactive as possible and get everybody's questions and help you all out. So, as usual, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, fire them off to that same email and send me your worlds. We'll look at them together next week. If you don't have one already, feel free to make one. Just check out that doc and see what we can come up with, and we'll do it together. It'll be super fun.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks,
thank
everybody.
You guys.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you both. Bye.
Bye-bye.